There is a special kind of arrogance that comes with a badge, a gun, and unchecked power. Officer Thomas Rourke thought he had picked the perfect victim, a quiet black woman he could easily frame to pad his arrest stats. He had no idea she was the undercover FBI agent sent to destroy him. The city of Chicago has a way of hiding its sins in the bitter cold. In the 14th District, those sins wore a dark blue uniform. Officer Thomas Rourke was a 10-year veteran of the force, a man whose personnel file was a labyrinth of excessive force complaints, mysterious cash seizures, and coerced confessions. But in a precinct that protected its own, Rourke was untouchable. He preyed on the vulnerable, the undocumented, the poor, and minorities whom he knew the system would never believe over a decorated officer. He was a predator hiding behind a tin shield. For months, whispers of Rourke's extortion ring had reached the highest levels of the Department of Justice. Local internal affairs either couldn't or wouldn't bring him down. That was when the Federal Bureau of Investigation's Public Corruption Unit stepped in, launching a covert sting dubbed Operation Broken Shield. Enter Supervisory Special Agent Maya Harper. Maya was a 12-year veteran of the Bureau, a brilliant operative with a law degree from Georgetown and a tactical mindset forged in counter-narcotics. She was meticulous, patient, and completely fearless. For this assignment, she stripped away her federal identity. She traded her tailored suits for faded scrubs, her government-issued SUV for a beat-up 2008 Honda Civic with a rattling muffler, and her true identity for a fabricated life. To the streets of West Garfield Park, she was Maya Jackson, an exhausted, overworked nursing student just trying to get by. The trap was set on a freezing Tuesday night in late November. The streets were slick with freezing rain, the amber glow of the streetlights casting long, distorted shadows across the pavement. Maya was driving home from her cover job at a local diner, her hands casually resting on the steering wheel at 10 and 2. Hidden beneath her thick winter coat, taped securely to her ribs, was a state-of-the-art digital audio transmitter. Concealed seamlessly within the frame of her rearview mirror was a high-definition microcamera, feeding directly to an FBI surveillance van parked 3 blocks away, manned by her handler, Special Agent David Miller. Suddenly, the unmistakable strobe of blue and red lights flooded her cabin. Maya's pulse remained steady, though she arranged her face into a mask of convincing anxiety. She pulled the Honda over to the curb, killed the engine, and rolled down her window, letting the biting wind whip into the car. In the side mirror, she watched Officer Thomas Rourke approach. He walked with a swagger, his hand casually resting on the butt of his service weapon. He shined a blinding, tactical flashlight directly into her eyes before leaning heavily against her doorframe. "License, registration, and proof of insurance," Rourke demanded, his voice a low, gravelly bark devoid of any professional courtesy. "Is there a problem, officer?" Maya asked, pitching her voice slightly higher, allowing a tremor of manufactured fear to bleed into her words. "I was just heading home." "Your taillight is out," Rourke lied smoothly. Maya knew for a fact both lights were in perfect working condition. Miller had checked them 20 minutes prior. Rourke didn't even bother to walk around to the back of the car to feign a look. He kept his flashlight pinned to her face. "You seem nervous, Maya. Why are you shaking? You got something in this vehicle you shouldn't have?" "No, sir. I'm just cold. I just got off a double shift at the hospital." Rourke sneered, a cruel twisting of his lips. He had done this 100 times before. He identified a target who looked too tired, too poor, or too frightened to fight back. "Step out of the vehicle." "Officer, please, I haven't done anything." "I said step out of the vehicle now," Rourke barked, violently yanking the driver's side door open. Maya complied, shivering as she stood on the slush-covered sidewalk. Rourke patted her down with unnecessary roughness, his demeanor aggressive and demeaning. He then turned his attention to her car. Without asking for consent, without probable cause, he began to tear through her interior. He ripped the contents of her glove box onto the floorboards, tore up the floor mats, and rummaged through her nursing textbooks. Then he moved to the trunk. Maya stood by the cruiser, watching him. She knew exactly what was about to happen. Rourke leaned into the trunk, his back turned to her for exactly 4 seconds. When he turned back around, he was holding a small, clear plastic baggie filled with a crystalline white substance. "Well, well, well," Rourke said, a triumphant smirk plastering his face as he held the baggie up under the street lamp. "What do we have here, Maya? Looks like your double shift pays a little extra on the side. This is at least 20 grams of crystal meth." "That's not mine," Maya cried out, playing the desperate victim to absolute perfection. "I've never seen that before in my life. You put that there." "Shut your mouth," Rourke snapped, stalking toward her. He grabbed her wrists, spinning her around and slamming her chest against the icy metal of her trunk. The cold bit into her cheek. He slapped cold steel handcuffs onto her wrists, ratcheting them down painfully tight. "You have the right to remain silent. I suggest you use it, because nobody is going to believe a junkie nurse over a decorated cop." As Rourke aggressively shoved her into the back of his freezing squad car, Maya lowered her head, letting her hair obscure her face. She wasn't crying. Beneath the shadow of her hair, she was smiling. "We got you," she thought, the wire against her ribs capturing every single word, every threat, and every lie. 4 months later, the Cook County Circuit Courthouse. The air in courtroom 302 was stale, smelling of old pine polish and nervous sweat. The room was a grand, imposing theatre of justice, walled with dark mahogany panels and filled with the muted murmurs of an impending trial. At the bench sat the Honourable Judge Helen Carmichael, a stern, no-nonsense jurist, known for her sharp intellect and impatience with time-wasters. To the casual observer, it looked like just another routine felony drug trial. The state of Illinois versus Maya Jackson. Possession of a controlled substance with intent to distribute. A Class X felony carrying a mandatory minimum sentence. Maya sat at the defense table, wearing a modest grey cardigan and a plain white blouse. She looked small, defeated, and completely overwhelmed by the machinery of the legal system. Next to her sat her attorney, Arthur Coyle. Coyle looked the part of a burnt-out, low-rent public defender. His suit was slightly wrinkled, his tie was off-center, and he spent the morning clumsily shuffling through disorganized stacks of manila folders. But Arthur Coyle was not a public defender. He was Arthur Coyle, Deputy Chief of the Civil Rights Division at the Department of Justice, one of the most ruthless and brilliant federal prosecutors in the country. He had flown in from Washington, D.C. specifically for this trial, operating under special dispensation, playing the role of a bumbling local lawyer to keep the trap hidden until the final possible second. At the prosecution table sat Assistant District Attorney Brian Halloway. Halloway was young, ambitious, and entirely oblivious to the federal sting operation happening right under his nose. He thought he had a slam-dunk case handed to him by a veteran officer. "The state calls Officer Thomas Rourke," ADA Halloway announced, his voice echoing off the high ceilings. The heavy wooden doors at the back of the courtroom swung open, and Rourke strode in. He looked like a recruitment poster for the police department. His uniform was crisply ironed, his brass buttons gleamed, and his boots were polished to a mirror shine. He walked with an air of absolute invincibility, a man entirely comfortable in a room where he held the power of life and death over the people he arrested. He took the stand, raised his right hand, and swore an oath to God to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. Maya watched him from beneath her eyelashes, her expression neutral. Halloway approached the podium. "Officer Rourke, could you please detail the events of the night of November 14th? Rourke leaned into the microphone, his voice calm, authoritative, and deeply persuasive. He was a practiced liar, smooth and practiced on the stand. "I was on routine patrol in the West Garfield area when I observed the defendant's vehicle, a 2008 Honda Civic, swerving erratically across the center lane," Rourke began, unspooling his fabricated narrative. "I initiated a traffic stop. Upon approaching the vehicle, I immediately noticed the defendant was highly agitated. She was sweating profusely despite the cold weather, her pupils were dilated, and she was speaking rapidly. Classic signs of narcotic intoxication." Halloway nodded encouragingly. "Did you ask the defendant to step out of the vehicle?" "I did, objectionably for my own safety," Rourke continued smoothly. "When she opened the door, I detected the distinct chemical odor associated with methamphetamine production. Based on that probable cause, I initiated a search of the vehicle. In the trunk, hidden beneath a spare tire iron, I discovered a plastic bag containing what was later confirmed to be 22 grams of methamphetamine. And did the defendant say anything when you found the narcotics?" Rourke looked directly at the jury, his face a mask of solemn duty. "She became belligerent, shouting profanities, and explicitly offered me a cash bribe to look the other way. When I refused, she threatened to claim I planted the evidence." Sitting at the defense table, Maya remained perfectly still. The audacity of his lies was almost breathtaking. Rourke hadn't just padded the truth, he had invented a completely fictional reality, an intricate web of perjury designed to lock an innocent woman in a cage for a decade. "Thank you, Officer Rourke. Nothing further," Halloway said, taking his seat with a smug smile. Judge Carmichael peered over her reading glasses at the defense table. "Mr. Coyle, your witness." Arthur Coyle stood up slowly, fumbling with a pen that slipped from his fingers and clattered onto the hardwood floor. He muttered an apology, awkwardly picking it up, looking every inch the outmatched defense attorney. The jury watched him with a mixture of pity and annoyance. Rourke smirked from the witness stand, clearly amused by the apparent incompetence of his opposition. "Officer Rourke," Coyle began, his voice hesitant, almost timid. He walked to the podium and leaned heavily against it. "You have an impeccable memory, very detailed." "I take my job seriously, Counselor," Rourke replied, his tone dripping with condescension. "I can see that," Coyle said, adjusting his glasses. "Now, I just want to make sure I have my facts straight. You testified under oath just a moment ago that my client was swerving across the center lane. Is that correct?" "Yes, and that when you approached, she was sweating, erratic, and smelling of chemicals." "That is correct." "And you found the drugs, specifically under a tire iron in the trunk, after smelling these chemicals from the driver's seat?" "Yes, Counselor, as I stated." Rourke crossed his arms, looking bored. "It's all in my official report." "Right, the report." Coyle picked up a piece of paper, squinting at it as if struggling to read the font. "And you are absolutely certain about these sequence of events? There is no possibility you are mistaken about the erratic driving or the bribe she allegedly offered you?" Rourke leaned forward, his eyes locking onto Maya with a cold, predatory glare. He wanted her to feel how helpless she was. "I am 100% certain, Counselor. I remember it perfectly. She practically threw the drugs at me when she knew she was caught." 100%, Coyle repeated softly. The bumbling, hesitant demeanor vanished from Coyle's body in a fraction of a second. His posture straightened, his shoulders squared, and the fumbling pen was placed neatly on the podium. When he looked up at Rourke, his eyes were as hard as flint. The atmosphere in the courtroom suddenly shifted. The air grew heavy. "Officer Rourke," Coyle's voice rang out, no longer timid but booming with the sharp, lethal authority of a federal prosecutor going in for the kill. "Would it surprise you to know that the 2008 Honda Civic my client was driving is mechanically incapable of swerving, because its steering column had been modified with a GPS locking tracking module?" Rourke frowned, slightly thrown off balance. "I don't know anything about that. I know what I saw. And would it surprise you to know," Coyle continued, his voice echoing loudly, taking a step toward the witness stand, "that the trunk of that specific vehicle does not contain a spare tire iron because the entire wheel well housing was removed to make room for a dual battery power supply." Holloway stood up. "Objection, Your Honor. Where is defense counsel going with this? These modifications were not in the discovery." "Your Honor," Coyle said smoothly, never breaking eye contact with Rourke, "the defense is about to introduce new evidence that goes directly to the absolute fabrication of this officer's testimony." Judge Carmichael narrowed her eyes. "I'll allow it, but tread carefully, Mr. Coyle. Proceed." Rourke shifted uncomfortably in his seat. The smirk was gone. A faint bead of sweat formed at his hairline. He looked at Maya, who was no longer slouching. She was sitting perfectly straight, her eyes locked onto his, a cold, unyielding predator staring down her prey. "Officer Rourke," Coyle said, pulling a silver flash drive from his vest pocket. "Are you familiar with the term Title III wiretap?" "A Title III wiretap," Officer Thomas Rourke repeated, his voice losing its practiced, resonant timbre. It cracked just slightly on the final syllable. He looked at ADA Brian Holloway, who was furiously flipping through his case files, his face draining of color. Holloway had no idea what was happening. "Yes, Officer Rourke," Arthur Coyle said, stepping away from the podium and pacing slowly before the jury box. The bumbling, incompetent persona was entirely gone. In its place was a legal apex predator. A federal warrant authorizing the interception of oral communications, usually reserved for organized crime, cartels, and, in this specific instance, systemic police corruption. "Your Honor!" Holloway shouted, finally finding his feet. "I demand to know what is going on here. The state was never provided with any Title III documentation in discovery. This is a trial for a low-level narcotics possession, not a federal conspiracy." Judge Helen Carmichael took off her glasses, her sharp eyes darting between Coyle, the panicked prosecutor, and the suddenly sweating police officer on the stand. "Mr. Coyle, you are dancing on the edge of a mistrial and a contempt charge. You had better explain yourself, and it had better be spectacular." Coyle reached into his breast pocket and produced a thick, folded document sealed with the blue crest of the Department of Justice. He handed it to the bailiff, who passed it up to the bench. "Your Honor, what you are looking at is a declassified federal warrant signed by a United States magistrate judge," Coyle explained, his voice projecting clearly across the dead, silent courtroom. "It authorizes the Federal Bureau of Investigation to conduct a covert sting operation targeting the 14th District of the Chicago Police Department. Specifically, it authorizes the surveillance of Officer Thomas Rourke. My client is not Maya Jackson, a nursing student. She is Supervisory Special Agent Maya Harper of the FBI's Public Corruption Unit." A collective gasp echoed through the gallery. The jury members leaned forward, their eyes wide. Holloway dropped his pen, the plastic clattering loudly against the prosecution table. On the witness stand, Rourke looked as if he had been struck by lightning. The blood rushed from his face, leaving his skin a pale, sickly grey. He gripped the wooden railing of the stand so hard his knuckles turned white. He looked at the defense table. Maya was no longer slouching. She had removed the oversized, frumpy grey cardigan, revealing a sharp, tailored black blouse underneath. She sat perfectly erect, her hands folded neatly on the table. When she met Rourke's gaze, her expression was completely devoid of fear. It was the cold, calculating look of a hunter who had just successfully cornered its prey. "Your Honor," Coyle continued, turning back to the judge. "The defense moves to enter into evidence Defense Exhibit A, a continuous, unedited audio and video recording of the traffic stop in question, captured by concealed federal equipment on Agent Harper's person and within the bait vehicle." Judge Carmichael skimmed the federal warrant, her expression hardening into a mask of pure fury. She looked at Rourke, her eyes narrowing with absolute disgust. "Admitted. Play the tape, Mr. Coyle." Coyle plugged the silver flash drive into the courtroom's multimedia system. A large flat-screen monitor mounted on the wall flickered to life. The video was from the perspective of the Honda Civic's rearview mirror. The courtroom watched in breathless silence as the blue and red lights flashed. They heard the crystal-clear audio of Maya's manufactured nervous voice. "Is there a problem, officer? I was just heading home. Then..." Rourke's voice filled the room, harsh and aggressive. "Your taillight is out. You seem nervous, Maya. Why are you shaking? You got something in this vehicle you shouldn't have." The jury watched as Rourke forced her out of the car. The video feed couldn't see the trunk, but the audio was unmistakable. The courtroom listened to the sound of Rourke tearing the car apart without consent. Then 4 seconds of silence. "Well, well, well," Rourke's recorded voice sneered through the speakers. "What do we have here, Maya? Looks like your double shift pays a little extra on the side. This is at least 20 grams of crystal meth." Maya's recorded voice cried out, "That's not mine. I've never seen that before in my life. You put that there." The courtroom then heard the sickening thud of Maya being slammed against the trunk. Rourke's voice dropped to a vicious, cruel whisper, a whisper he thought no one else would ever hear. "Shut your mouth. You have the right to remain silent. I suggest you use it, because nobody is going to believe a junkie nurse over a decorated cop." Coyle paused the recording. The silence in courtroom 302 was deafening. "Officer Rourke," Coyle said, his voice echoing off the mahogany walls. "I did not hear my client offering you a bribe, nor did I see her swerving. I did, however, hear you actively threaten her after miraculously finding narcotics in a wheel well that does not physically exist. Do you wish to amend your sworn testimony?" Rourke opened his mouth, but no words came out. His chest heaved as panic finally overrode his arrogance. That audio is doctored. This is a set-up. She's lying." "The FBI does not doctor audio, officer," Maya spoke up. Her voice was calm, authoritative, and commanded the immediate attention of every single person in the room. "And I assure you, the 52 other victims we have identified who suffered this exact same extortion tactic at your hands will corroborate the pattern of behavior." Judge Carmichael slammed her gavel down with the force of a gunshot. "Mr. Halloway," the young ADA jumped. Yes, Your Honor. Does the state wish to continue prosecuting this case?" she demanded, her voice dripping with venom. "The state, Your Honor, the state moves to immediately dismiss all charges against the defendant with prejudice," Halloway stammered, looking at Rourke with profound betrayal. "Charges dismissed," Judge Carmichael snapped. She pointed a trembling finger at the witness stand. "Officer Rourke, you are a disgrace to the badge, a disgrace to this city, and a disgrace to this courtroom. You are not leaving this building." The heavy wooden doors at the back of the courtroom swung open violently. 4 men in dark suits, wearing tactical vests emblazoned with the bright yellow letters FBI, marched down the center aisle. Leading them was Special Agent David Miller, Maya's handler. Rourke stood up from the witness stand, his police instincts kicking in, but he was completely surrounded. He looked frantically at the exits, but the bailiffs had already locked the doors. The hunter had officially become the hunted. "Thomas Rourke," Agent Miller said, his voice hard and uncompromising as he stepped up to the witness stand. "You are under arrest for deprivation of rights under color of law, perjury, evidence tampering, and federal racketeering." Miller grabbed Rourke's wrists, the same wrists Rourke had used to forcefully cuff Maya just months prior, and wrenched them behind his back. The heavy click of federal handcuffs locking into place echoed loudly in the stunned courtroom. As Rourke was led down from the stand, stripped of his gun belt and his authority, he was forced to walk directly past the defense table. Maya stood up, smoothing out her black blouse. She looked the disgraced officer directly in the eye. "You said nobody was going to believe a junkie nurse over a decorated cop," Maya said quietly, ensuring only he could hear her. "You were right, but they definitely believe a supervisory special agent. Have a nice life in federal prison, Thomas." Rourke's face contorted in rage, but he was powerless. The FBI agents dragged him out of the courtroom, the heavy doors swinging shut behind him, sealing his fate. The arrest of Thomas Rourke was the earthquake that shattered the Chicago 14th District. As Rourke was being processed in a federal holding facility, simultaneous raids were being executed across the city. The FBI seized files, locker contents, and computer hard drives from the precinct. Operation Broken Shield had cast a wide net, and Rourke was merely the largest fish. Within 48 hours, Captain Robert Higgins and 6 other officers were placed on administrative leave, eventually facing federal indictments for turning a blind eye to Rourke's extortion ring. The Department of Justice initiated a sweeping civil rights investigation into the precinct's practices, but the most profound impact was in the courtroom. Because of the irrefutable proof that Rourke systematically planted evidence, the district attorney's office was forced to review every single arrest he had made over his 10-year career. Over the next 6 months, 84 convictions were overturned. 84 men and women, many of whom were poor, marginalized, and without the resources to fight a corrupt system, were released from state penitentiaries. They walked out of prison gates and back to their families, their records expunged, victims of a predator who had finally been stopped. Thomas Rourke did not fare as well. Faced with the overwhelming evidence of the federal wiretap, the planted drugs, and the mountain of civil rights violations, his police union immediately abandoned him. Realizing a trial would only result in a harsher sentence, Rourke took a plea deal. He stood in a federal courtroom, stripped of his immaculate uniform, wearing a bright orange jumpsuit. The judge sentenced him to 22 years in a federal penitentiary, without the possibility of early parole. He would be housed in a special unit for former law enforcement, a caged animal for the next 2 decades of his life. Maya Harper did not attend his sentencing. She was already in another city, operating under another name, driving another beat-up car. The badge was meant to be a shield to protect the innocent. But when men like Thomas Rourke tried to forge it into a weapon, there were people like Maya Harper waiting in the dark to break it. If this story of absolute justice made your blood pump, hit that like button and share this video with your friends. True crime and real-life karma prove that no one is above the law, no matter what badge they wear. We drop incredible, jaw-dropping stories like this